You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome! This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have amazing Christian content creator and author Jordan Lee Dooley. In this episode, Jordan lays out her story and her entrance into motherhood and the battle that was, as well as what it looks like to make the wait worthwhile and how she really dug into her faith when she didn't understand. So let's go ahead and dive in. Well, welcome, Jordan, to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I also love the title. I think that's amazing. I love the title of your podcast.
Yeah, it was this place where the Lord, I really wanted a platform to speak to women in all kinds of areas, you know? And it was like, well, how can I encapsulate wellness, which has changed my life in so many ways, holistic living, like pro-metabolic eating, all the crunchy things, right? But what if I could speak to if only I were wiser with a biblical influence in all these other areas of life, from motherhood to postpartum. So that's kind of the heart of it. But I'm definitely, like I told you, fangirling right now.
Hey, likewise, I'm a big fan of what you're doing and the work that you're doing. And I mean, just relate, even like the heart for your podcast. I feel like it's interesting because when I started my podcast 5+ years ago, it was kind of just like a variety show, and it's gone through many phases, but it's really sweet the way that the Lord just uses your experiences, good, bad, ugly, all the in between, to refine what it is that he's calling you to do and what he's, giving you when it comes to your platform and how to steward that well and the messages that you're supposed to share. And so I just feel like there's such an alignment there. So I'm like really looking forward to chatting with you. I feel like we're, kindred spirits, if for lack of a better word. So
Well, before we kind of like dive headfirst into your story, I would love just to know what is going on in the day of life of Jordan, like right now.
Today? Today we've got some greasy hair. We've been running around with babies all morning. It's interesting because my husband and I are learning kind of getting into a little bit of a rhythm of him working in the morning, me trying to take the afternoons. So he actually just took the boys to go over to my mom's house for a little bit, and I am knocking out some podcast interviews, going to write a little bit this afternoon. So it's interesting. It's kind of this balance, and I'm really thankful for the work that I can do where I can like kind of squeeze it in pockets of nap time or visit to my mom's or things like that. But it's a lot of juggling of a lot of things, but it's a huge gift and it's been really fun. So just, the everyday chaos.
Yeah, totally. It's been so cool just to see kind of your story unfold. I was definitely one of those girls in college that when you released your Etsy sweatshirts,
oh yeah, oh my gosh,
our whole friend group had them. And then to like read through your books, follow along, walk alongside you in Crunchy, and just like see how the Lord has been able to work in your story has been so beautiful.
Well, thank you for all the support over the years. That's so encouraging and just humbling, honestly. Sometimes I'm like, wow, there's been a lot of eras. There's been a lot of just, over the last decade, really, just lots of different things that the Lord's had me do, both personally and professionally. And I feel like I've kind of landed in this really sweet spot where it all kind of has come together beautifully. But sometimes you kind of have to go through different phases and try different things. And I just always love and appreciate the support from those who've kind of hung around and stuck through the story and the journey. It means a lot. So yeah, I'm encouraged to hear that.
Absolutely. I would love just to get started into motherhood. We don't hold back on this platform, and I'm thankful for the grace that our guests have, and just diving into the hard topics, as I know like you're all too familiar with the ups and downs of motherhood.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get started by sharing just a brief story of your entrance into the motherhood.
Yeah.
As kind of your books have highlighted a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because my motherhood plan didn't go according to plan. I would have had 3 kids by 30 if it were up to me. I didn't have my first till I was almost 30. And it was definitely a refining journey. And I think in a nutshell, for those who may not be familiar with my experience, I, had the plan of after we've been married 2 years, we're going to try for a family. I got married at 22. So I was like, that gives me 6 years to have multiple kids. Perfect. So the 2-year mark came and went, and I was so caught up in my career. I was so caught up in, I had been building stuff online, all with the intent and the heart of, I want to have a business running so that when I have kids, I can do what I'm now doing, work in pockets and work during nap
Right.
times and be flexible. So I was building with that in mind, but I think I got so caught up in the building that time just kind of kept going. And we were coming up on the 3-year wedding anniversary, and my husband was like, hey, do you are you like, still wanting to try for kids? Because we've not really
Right.
discussed this, and you're really caught up in your work, and I don't want that to be the thing that holds you back. I don't want you to believe that, working and providing and doing these things that you're doing are, should stop you, or kids should, and I was like, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought about it. Like, time just kept going. So anyway, that was kind of the start of
Yeah.
our journey, about close to the 3-year mark when it came to our marriage. And so, I was like, let's just see what happens. And then I got pregnant pretty quickly. And I remember thinking, oh, perfect. That was easy. So glad I'm not one of those people who struggle with fertility. And then I
Mhm.
had my first miscarriage unexpectedly. Like, you never think it's going to happen to you till it does. And,
Right.
I was kind of told it's a fluke. Like, I'm kind of breezing through. There's a lot of details, but
Mhm.
kind of was told, you're young, you're healthy, you're 25, you'll be fine. So try again a few months later. Ended up carrying that baby further, like into the start of the second trimester. We thought we're in the safe zone. Things are great. Unexpected loss. Had an ultrasound. Like, I had no signs of anything going wrong. We had actually been
Wow.
tracking growth every 2 weeks. So I was seeing baby grow and like connecting. And it was just like, it was kind of a curveball to say the least. And it was definitely probably the most difficult physical recovery I had. I had multiple miscarriages, and probably the most difficult emotional recovery for various different reasons. And so anyway, went through that. And then we kind of took a break for a sec because I was like, I need to try to see if I can get to the bottom of what was going on. And that's really where I kicked off a lot of my wellness journey, and I tried so many things. And I'm sure you can relate to this. I went like gluten-free lifestyle. I went, dairy is bad. I went like,
Mhm.
and there are definitely people who can't really have those things. But I think I just started grasping for straws and grasping for like any health advice I could find. And I was like, oh, inflammation's the
Yep.
problem. I have to get rid of all inflammation. Oh, this is the problem. I need to. And I kind of went really deep into it really fast, to the point where I was almost obsessive, trying to control everything as I was learning. Because sometimes when your eyes are open to certain things like toxins in
Mhm.
products or whatever, it's almost like you're just like, oh my gosh, I have so much to fix. And you can almost fixate on it and obsess over it because it's like a whole new world is open to you. So that was kind of the start of my journey. It was like I was sharing what I was learning. I was like, oh my gosh, how did I not know this stuff before? This all makes so much sense. And so I kind of went on this journey as we were taking a little break from trying to, do some testing, get some answers, etc. So then after about, I don't even remember exactly how long, a handful of months, close to like maybe 8 or 9 months, we were like, okay, we could probably start trying again. I feel like I got some answers. We have a good plan. And then all of a sudden I just wasn't getting pregnant. And it took a long time to get
Mm.
pregnant again, which had never been an issue before. And I was like, seriously, now this on top of already struggling with multiple miscarriages, like what is going on? And I thought, I'm living a healthy lifestyle. What the heck? So come to find out a while later, I had had a DNC with my second pregnancy, and there was a little bit of retained placenta that was part of my complications. And that ended up triggering a low-grade chronic infection that I didn't really have a ton of symptoms of, other than all of a sudden infertility. I had endometritis, different from endometriosis. Endometritis is like it can either be acute, where it's like you have all the symptoms of infection, fever, pain, all these things,
Mhm.
or it can kind of be this chronic low grade where you don't have like the acute symptoms, but your periods might be a little different, or you can't get pregnant because your lining is inflamed.
Hmm.
So I ended up having that. I thought maybe I had scar tissue or something, but we went investigating and that's what we found. So I ended up getting on an antibiotic. My hippy dippy side was like, I hate this, but whatever. And then I conceived
Yeah.
again. So we had our third pregnancy. I found out on Mother's Day weekend, right after my second book, all about my journey of waiting and the process of contentment and learning to navigate the unknown. That came out, and that same month I got pregnant for the first time in almost 2 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, God just needed me to write this book. Like,
Wow.
got it. This is amazing. This is our miracle. And then still lost that baby. And I was like, what is going on? So anyway, that was kind of a little bit of and then there was like one other potential miscarriage in there that I didn't have confirmed one way or the other. So I don't know if I had a fourth miscarriage. I just know that there were a lot of bumps in the road, to say the least. So it was like a 3+ year journey of miscarriages, periods of infertility, and just really trying to get to the bottom of what was going on. So also, as we were pursuing biological children, somewhat early in our journey, we decided we're also going to pursue adoption,
Yeah.
whether or not we have biological children, because we'd always felt called to that. And I just felt very convicted that, like, if I hold them both in the same regard and I believe they're both a calling, then I should probably be pursuing both of them at the same time. And I should,
Right.
like, and not that you necessarily expect them to happen at the same time, but just wanted to be open to what God had in both. I didn't want to treat adoption as like as a backup plan if I truly felt called to it. And sometimes you don't realize you're called to it till you are able to have biological children, or that's a struggle. But we knew early on in our relationship that was something we wanted to do before we ever struggled with biological children. So we thought, let's just be open to what God has. Not expecting both to happen at the same time, but then they did. So that's my story.
I think when you had posted on Instagram, we're like, oh, it was just like so cool to see as you guys process. I'm sure it's like not the full picture on social media, but then just like the shared joy of your community to get to like celebrate that with you was like super special.
Yeah, it was. These little boys have a lot of internet aunties who've been very supportive and
Yeah.
prayer warriors just before they even existed, and I don't take that for granted. That's been such a huge blessing and a huge gift for sure.
Yeah. What was it like to kind of get all of it all at once? As I'm sure it's like overwhelming, but also joyful, but also, it's a multitude of emotions.
Yes, it was a lot. Yes. I would say the best word I can say is like whiplash in a great way and a hard way. And something that I kind of had to learn through the process is like, when you get everything you ever hoped for and dreamed for, like your greatest blessings can also be the greatest challenges, right? And so I had a hard time, especially when I ran into challenges of having two under one. Like there are unique things you have to balance and unique obstacles you come across. And it's not really that easy to just call your friend who may still have two under two and can relate in some ways, but most people can't relate to having a 6-month-old and a newborn. Like they're like, that's not biologically possible. So there were very few people I could go to and say, what do you do in this situation or that situation? And so it was really just a lot of trust in the Lord. It was a lot of there was just so many moments, especially the first year, where I'd sometimes look at Matt and be like, we have 2 high chairs. Like, what? Like a year ago, like we weren't even expecting to have ever one, So just to feel like it's so crazy because you can think God is withholding from you or it's never going to happen because it hasn't happened and one thing after another's gone wrong. To be honest, I was kind of bracing to be heartbroken by both situations. Like knowing the adoption was coming, finding out I was pregnant, I was like, oh, I'm just going to be heartbroken double this year. Awesome. Like I was so negative because that's all I knew, right? And then when that didn't happen and both went surprisingly well, I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I'm so incredibly grateful, but I still feel like I'm kind of like waiting for the other shoe to drop. First time they got sick, I was like, oh, this is it. Like you just spiral. So it was an emotional roller coaster, a lot of emotional whiplash, kind of adjusting from one extreme of I feel barren, I don't know if I'll ever have children, to, oh my gosh, I have 2 under 1. How did this happen? Even though I knew how it happened. And then and holding at such an arm's length in some ways. Like I was so guarded throughout the adoption process, throughout the pregnancy. I think even though I knew that those things were unfolding and happening, I wasn't fully expecting them to work. I was expecting to be heartbroken. So when they did work, it was like, oh, I have to adjust to this and I have to figure out how to do it. So it was that coupled with, just the practical, like learning, okay, how do we practically do this? How are we doing nights? How are we balancing work and kids? And, we just didn't have a slow like transition to parenthood. It was like baptism by fire. But what I will say is I can totally see the providence of the Lord in our story, because also throughout our, journey, both with adoption and biological children, we actually served with a ministry called Safe Families. It's kind of like respite care or like, similar to foster care, but usually shorter term. And the difference is families will act, instead of the court coming in and removing a child from a home, a parent prior to that happening will raise their hand and say, hey, I don't have a safe environment to raise my child in right now, or I need help and I don't have a mother-in-law I can call or a sister I can call to come take my kids while I take care of our water getting shut off or a domestic violence situation or whatever it might be. So sometimes moms or dads will raise their hand and say, I need help. And they call Safe Families. It's a resource that is available in many states. So they're voluntarily placing their children in a safe home or a safe family for a period of time that they need, whether that's 2 nights for, a hospital stay that they have, or 2 weeks or 2 months, depending on what the need is. So interestingly enough, we actually were given a placement, or we got a placement from Safe Families of 2 under 2. Just kind of off out of the blue. This was before, obviously, the adoption went through and everything else. So we had a 16-month-old and a 2-month-old. So it was interesting because I feel like, and then we had them for a little over a month. And we had to learn on the fly, right? It was like, that was more children we had ever had in our home. So I can look back and see. And then that actually was a conversation of like, maybe they need to be adopted. The mother was asking about adoption. That ended up not happening. So that was actually kind of what triggered us to say, we need to start the adoption process. This is a calling of ours. But it was just so fascinating because I remember we got really attached to those girls and it was so hard to say goodbye to them. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, I see what God was doing. Like that was total preparation. That was getting our heart posture in the right place. It was teaching us how to balance something that just like all of a sudden you have two. It's not like,
Mm-hmm.
you gradually build a family. It's like overnight there's two under two in your home. And we had to learn on the fly how to do that. So I can see the ways God prepared us even when it was hard and it was like, why is this happening? And it was a challenging first year. I think there's always new challenges with parenthood, but also, like you said, so joyful, so like unbelievably fun, and exhausting at the same time. I don't know the last time I slept 8 hours straight, but
Yeah,
we're
same.
thriving.
Same. My son will be 3 next month, and he's never slept through the night, so it's all right.
So you're like, it's fine. Yeah. I had a friend say something to me right before I had Shepherd. They were like, yeah, so basically parenthood is you have a baby and then you just don't sleep for the next like 5 years. I was like, okay, well, thanks for giving me that realistic expectation.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. So obviously, I've talked to some other friends that have experienced loss on a multitude of
Mm.
scales, and grief is one of them. And I know that you've talked about it. So, how would you encourage women that are in the pit, in grief, in the
Mm.
valley, and those we know as believers from an outside perspective, like those are the sweetest moments with the Lord. But when you're in it, it's really hard to count it all joy, brothers and
Yeah.
sisters. So,
Yeah.
how would you encourage or speak to a woman or even
Yeah.
yourself in those moments where you're like, I can't get out of this
Hmm.
pit?
I think one of the most helpful things that I experienced when I was in it was the friends who were willing to just like sit in it and not encourage me to just get stuck there, but also not invalidate it by saying like, count it all joy, it's gonna be great, right? Like, or try to
Right.
be positive. Like, I really appreciated my Christian friends who would actually sit there and be like, this sucks. Like, this isn't okay. And nothing
Mm-hmm.
about it. Like, yes, God may be good and we believe that, but this isn't good. And it's hard to see his goodness in this. And
Yeah.
your feelings about that, your questions about that, your doubts, your concerns, your wrestling, like that's all valid. And it's not like they're like giving permission to sin, but at the same time, like
Right.
being told that it's okay to work through those feelings and that when you're angry, like that's part of, I think of, if you think of your relationship with God, I think sometimes it can be so hard. And I know for me, like I admit this all the time, I feel like I failed the test in some ways. There were times I was so angry at God that I was like, I would literally don't want anything to do with you. Like I'm not going to church, and then I finally went back to church
Yeah.
after one of my miscarriages
Yeah.
where I was just so angry for a while. And I went back to church and first thing I see on stage is like a 9-month pregnant girl who's like now a friend of mine. But at the time I was like, are you kidding me? Like I
Mhm.
walked out, I was like,
Kidding
bye,
me.
I'm never coming back here. Like I was just, I don't know. I had such an
Yeah.
attitude in some ways because I just felt, um, a lot of things, questions like I wrestled with, I don't deserve this. Meanwhile, there's people who aren't trying to live a righteous life or who don't want children, who are just being abundantly blessed. Like I can't reconcile that in my brain, even though that sounds terrible to say out loud. So all of that said, like I think like I just want to encourage you if you are in the pit and you are walking through grief and you are questioning, where is God or why is God allowing this or whatever. I want to say like that's valid. And something that I came to realize that I just want to pass on to you, it doesn't necessarily fix it or make it all better, but I think something that helped me understand why do I feel so angry, right? Like I know God is good and I know he's working out all things for good. Like I believe that in my brain, but in my heart I can't feel that. And it's so broken that isn't like translating, right? And I was talking with
Yeah.
a friend one time and I was like, you know, a lot of Christians will say like the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy, right? That's biblical. We know that the brokenness,
Yeah.
the disease, the death, the loss, the hardships we experience are because of evil, because of sin, because of the enemy, honestly. If you go back even to the original fall. And I think we know that, but we get mad at God. It's like it's the enemy's doing, but we get mad at God. And I was like, why is
Mm.
that? And I started to realize
Yeah.
it's because I don't have a relationship with the enemy. I don't sit there expecting the enemy to protect me. I don't put my trust in the enemy. I don't I don't ask the enemy to hold my children in the palm of his hand. I put that in God's hands. And so when I feel like God didn't hold up his end of the bargain, or when I feel like, wait, I don't feel like you're really protecting me right now. I feel like you just completely abandoned me and I put my children in the palm of your hands, and that doesn't feel like a very safe place right now. Like I'm really confused. And it's because I have a relationship with God. I've put my trust in God. I've believed he can protect me. And I think we've maybe struggled with the belief that protection means no hard things, means no death, means no brokenness on this side of heaven. Now I can look back and see like, oh, there were certain things he had to protect me from or teach me or bring me through to get me to this place. But now I'm prepared to be the mother to the children he designed me to raise that are made for this crazy, insane world that they're going to have to grow up in. So like maybe their mom needed to go through some suffering and some hardship and some battles to have that like armor and that courage and the strength and the endurance that it would take to parent them in today's world. And I don't know why that is. I wish God could just have like downloaded everything I needed through like an easy pregnancy and birth first time around. But that's not always how we learn. That's not how our character is shaped. That's not how God prepares us. So I guess my encouragement to someone in the grief, in the struggle, in the valley is, if you're struggling with faith, if you're struggling with your relationship with God, if you're wrestling with that and you feel like Christians are just saying, just pray, or like, I remember I had some Christian friends who really struggled with me wrestling with my faith and being mad at God because they had been so used to me being the one that had answers and was the encourager and was the prayer warrior. And all of a sudden I was like, I don't effing know, you know, if I'm being honest. And that was hard for me. And I think sometimes we can feel like the judgment or the dismissal because people are really uncomfortable with that sometimes. And so as a friend, even if I don't know you personally, I just want to say like, the grief you feel, the anger you feel, the questions you're asking, the wrestling you have, like that's valid. And I want to encourage you to lean into that, not to sin, but to lean into that, because any deep relationship, like I will say my relationship with God may not look as pretty now, but it is so much more rich. It is so much deeper because we've walked through trial. And I think of my husband and I, like we've suffered together. We've been angry at each other before. We've misunderstood each other. We've misread each other's intentions, but we've come back and that's actually sharpened and deepened our relationship. Why should we expect it to be any different with God if it's truly a relationship, right? Relationships go through roller coasters. Relationships have misunderstandings. Relationships have hard communication and hard conversations, and that's what gives them depth, and that's what gives them beauty. If they're just always like, yay, 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 which I think sometimes Christians feel like they have to like portray in order to like stay a Christian, I think that the relationship with God can feel very surface and very fake, you know? So I just want to encourage you, like, explore that, lean into that, like, ask the hard questions. Don't sin against God, but also don't be afraid to ask God the hard questions and bring your anger and your feelings and your tears to him. That will deepen your relationship, even if right now you feel like there is no relationship.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the most like pivotal moments in my early walk with Jesus was this time where I was running the opposite direction. I had a friend that held on to me really tight. And one night she was just like, Raina, how good is God? She was like on a scale of 1 to 100. And I remember saying, God is good 30% of the time. And she's like, okay, we need to get you to a place where you can say God is good 100% of the time. And that didn't happen overnight. And one of the first things that I did, good, bad, or otherwise, was I needed like a full 30 minutes that she just sat with me and I like cussed out God for all the brokenness that I had walked through in my story up until that point. And I can totally relate with like, I don't think if I were to look back on those moments, I would have been equipped in the same way if I hadn't have grieved as deeply as I did during those really hard seasons.
Yeah, lamenting. Absolutely. Yeah. And the raw reality of that, like there was some times where I'm like, I think I just cursed God. Am I going to hell? Like I remember thinking that. And my husband was like, he's like, the fact that you're asking that and the fact that you're willing to take your raw feelings to God, and then the fact kind of like repenting of that and recognizing that and wrestling with that, he's like, that shows you have like a deep trust and relationship with God. Like if you didn't care and you were like, I don't care, whatever, like that's different, you know. He's like, but you like that honesty is what will deepen your relationship with God. And I was like, okay, good, because I feel like a horrible human, but like I'm real pissed, you know. Like it was this really interesting just wrestle, but like that's the reality. I wish more Christians would just say that. Like I wish more of us would just admit this is what's in my heart. Like it really is hard for me when I connect with. And that's not to say, you know, you don't want to praise God in the storm. Like, absolutely. Anytime you can do that, please do that. But it was hard for me when I'd connect with, you know, others who were maybe walking through a hardship of their own. And then instead of just being honest, like, I'm pissed about this, but God is good. It was just like, but God is good all the time. We're trusting him. I'm like, do you really like 1000% feel that? Or are you saying that because you want to believe it, but you're leaving out the other half of like the wrestling and the honest questions, right? I was just like, you're a better Christian than me, I guess. Like, I'm not passing the test because I'm pretty dang honest about how mad I am, you know? But at the end of the day, like, I think that honesty is everybody's going to do that differently, right? And we, like I said, we want to try not to sin against God, but the reality is we're sinners too. So sometimes our anger will lead us to say things or do things
Yeah.
we otherwise wouldn't want to do. And that's where the great gift of grace and the truth of, and the importance of repentance come in. But bottom line is, like, I just think lean into those people who allow you to struggle, who allow you to be honest, who aren't trying to fix it for you, but are speaking truth into you. If you feel like someone's trying to like rush your grieving process because they're uncomfortable with you, not, saying the Christian-y things and doing all the Christian-y things perfectly or whatever, then that might not be the person to lean into in the season of grief. They might be a great friend for a Bible study when you're in a better season,
Yeah.
but you need the people who can like walk through the valley of death with you and wrestle with you and cover you in prayer and speak truth into you without just like dismissing your feelings or your struggles or your questions with Christian platitudes. And there's a difference, and you will sense the difference. And if you use wisdom and discernment, I think that's where it becomes really clear. So just seek those people out and know, like, if you're feeling these things, you're not alone. Like, we've done it and we've wrestled and we've been in the pit. And like, I love this C.S. Lewis quote. Have you heard that C.S. Lewis quote about the House of Cards?
Mm-mm.
So a lot of times I think, like, we think, oh, God's giving us struggle or suffering or allowing us to walk through suffering because he's trying to see how strong our faith is. Do we trust him, right? And then I came across this quote by C.S. Lewis. It says, God has not been trying an experiment on my faith or love in order to find out their quality.
Yeah.
He knew it already. Like, God knows our heart. He knows how like genuine or deep or honest our faith is, right? It was I who didn't. And then he goes on to say, in this trial, he makes us occupy the dock, the witness box, and the bench all at once, right? This is like a court trial scene. The dock, the witness box, and the bench all at once. He always knew that my temple was a house of cards, and his only way of making me realize the fact was to knock it down. So like through suffering, God sometimes opens our eyes to the weak places in our faith or the true doubts we have. Like, we may say all the Christian things or we may do all the Bible studies, and then when push comes to shove and shiz hits the fan in our own life and our house of cards gets knocked down, we realize, like, man, so much of my faith was kind of a house of cards. Like, I was doing all the things, but like this trial is what's making me realize, like, God is showing me the areas that I'm actually very weak and I'm actually really doubting and I actually really don't trust that he's good. And that's humbling. But also it helps you rebuild a house on a more solid foundation, and not just a house of cards that looks good and Christian and sounds good, but as it is actually really honest and deep and true. So that really was eye-opening for me, because I thought God is allowing me to walk through pain and suffering and grief because he's trying to see how strong my faith is. He already knew that. It was I that didn't know that. I didn't realize I was like kind of, I had nothing to take me deeper until I had suffering. So anyway, I love that C.S. Lewis quote.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. I'm curious then, because we're walking through it in our own story. We walk through mold loss, starting over all the things recently, all the health issues that came with that. And so we're actually going to start trying for our second baby soon, after my husband, he's in the Army and like finishes all the Army things in this pocket of school for him. But I'm curious if you would give the same exhortation to fear, because even in my own heart, knowing all the Christian things and then having other women that I've walked alongside in loss, I can't help but hear that voice in the back of my head that says, yeah, you did get pregnant on our first try, but then what if it doesn't? Like secondary infertility is very much a thing. And then especially walking with other women that have lost any kind of loss after their first baby. So would you say the same thing to fear as you would to grief? Or how would you encourage to that woman that's like, I'm hearing that small whisper,
Yeah.
and I won't be able to make it if that continues to snowball and live in my heart?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like so much of my motherhood journey became very, and just so many of my journeys, but especially that, because it was so tainted by, I had experienced the very real fears. When a fear becomes a reality to you or someone very close to you, it's no longer this kind of like out there thing that you're thinking might happen. It's like, oh, this is actually a very likely possibility. Like, I'm not unaware of that. And I think sometimes as Christians, we ignore the fact that God gave us the feeling of fear to sense danger, to be aware, right? But at the same time, that can then like spiral out of control to the point where we're just fearing everything, because our flesh basically can almost like grasp onto that in a sense, or in an effort to prepare to guard ourselves, right? And I know I did that. I struggled to connect with Shepherd my entire pregnancy because I just thought for sure this is going to end poorly. Like, that's all I know. And so, I feel like fear is still something that I'm working through a lot. But I actually interviewed Jenny Allen on my podcast a couple weeks ago, and she shared something with me that stuck with me. So I'll pass it on here. Because I think it's a really important reminder. And I don't know that it's like an answer to the question, but it's something that I've been clinging to through my own fears of kids getting sick, or, now losing them in a different way than I ever have before. She talked about how in the Bible, how there's the command of do not fear, like however many times. It's everywhere, all over the Bible. And she said she kind of started digging into that and studying that and looking at the original context in which that was written in most cases throughout the Bible. And she said, so often Christians have taken that as a command, don't fear, right? She's like, but I actually learned it was more of like a comfort from the Father. Like, she goes, for example, if I'm in a closet during a tornado with my kids and I tell them, don't be afraid, it's going to be okay, I'm right here, don't be afraid. She's like, that's the tone and the heart and the posture with which God and Jesus were telling, like, think about Jesus on the boat with his disciples. Like, I mean, that's maybe not the best example, because there were definitely times where he's like, really, you don't trust me, I'm right here. So that's not to say there was never a time like that, but we've taken it to be a command. Like, you're not allowed to be afraid. If you're afraid, you're not trusting God. When in reality, as a parent and a loving father, he was actually offering comfort to his children, saying, don't be afraid, I'm right here. So do not fear sounds like a command, but in our like way we would say it, and the way that God was originally saying it was like this, don't be afraid, I'm right here, daddy's right here, right? So that doesn't mean that there's not real risks outside. That doesn't mean that there's not a storm. That doesn't mean that there's not danger. That doesn't mean that there's not disease and illness. But he's like, but I'm right here. Like, don't be afraid. And so I've really just taken that to heart and held on to that, because there's real fears, and to just dismiss those, like, well, I'm not supposed to fear, so I'm just going to ignore the reality that those are right there and there's a tornado outside my door. Like, like, that's not natural, or that doesn't make sense. But it's like, but am I leaning into the Father through those fears? Am I leaning into his arms and knowing, okay, I'm afraid and there are real risks and things could go wrong, but he's right here and he won't leave my side and he's with me. Like, I don't have to be afraid. I think that is just the mindset and the heart posture from which we, I think, can navigate fear, knowing God isn't sitting there from his royal throne commanding us, like, do not fear, silly, child. Like, he's saying, child, don't fear, I'm right here. And that doesn't mean hard things may not happen. It's like natural to be afraid that things could go wrong or things may hurt. But at the same time, like, that is so helpful for me when I begin to wrestle with and struggle with fear.
That's super precious, because I think it shifts the whole tone. Anywhere we would read that, like, instead of the authoritative, exactly like you said, I've always felt it in that command, authoritative sense of do not fear, or you don't love me enough if you do fear. On the back end, it's that comfort of speaking to, know my heart posture. I don't know where else to go, God. Like, I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. God, I've got nothing else. A comfort in that moment feels so much better than the lie, I think, that can come from that. And, oh, if I continue to still feel fear, then I must not trust God enough.
Yeah. And I would never say that to my child who's afraid of, fireworks outside, or a storm, or something else that is scary to a child, something new, something that they've never experienced, but that they can sense might be, something that they will experience. I wouldn't be like, don't fear, you don't trust me. Like, they'd be like, what? Like, and when we actually think of God as a loving father and a parent and, a savior, like, oh yeah, why, that doesn't make sense for him to say, like, don't fear, you don't trust me. That doesn't mean he's not occasionally annoyed or frustrated with us when we just, like, when he's like, did I not show you I'm trustworthy? Right. But at the same time, I think when you can think of it through the lens of a mother or a father, it totally helps, like, change the way that you're understanding God's comfort and presence in a fearful or in an experience that feels scary or vulnerable.
What is something that you wish you could go back and say? Maybe some of these answers are all kind of similar, but go back and say to yourself, or any woman in waiting, whether it's waiting. I look back and think of so many seasons of waiting that I wasn't prepared for or equipped to handle or wrestle well, like waiting for my spouse, waiting for good girlfriends, waiting for a baby, waiting for the job, waiting for the next, our next duty station. I think they all come with different challenges, but like, if you could choose like one core truth that you could speak of yourself or a good friend, what would you say to the woman in waiting?
Something I wrote in my book that was about waiting and kind of these in-between seasons and uncertainty and unmet expectations, which all kind of are the same thing, but sometimes they look a little different. I wrote about how I had to really learn, and that I wish even earlier in my journey I could have gone back and told myself this. Don't let a waiting season be a wasted season. I think sometimes when we're waiting for the thing, it feels like life really will begin, or things will be better, or X, Y, and Z will work when I have a spouse, when I have the job I like, when I have children, when I have. And the reality is, like, your life starts now. Your calling is on your life prior to the next season, prior to the next opportunity, prior to the next fill in the blank. And I think sometimes we kind of pause things a little bit, even unintentionally. We stop ourselves from growing experiences or opportunities or ways that God could stretch us because we're like, well, I want to do that when I have family, or I want to do that when, da, da, da. And I kind of had to really learn, like, don't let a wasted season or a waiting season be a wasted season, because you don't want to look back and be like, wow, how did I really grow in that season? Was I preparing, And I think I was talking to a friend about it. It took her a while to meet her spouse. And then she also struggled with some fertility challenges. And we were talking about how in the waiting, like when you are waiting for the next season of life or the thing you are desiring, the hard part is there's no guarantee that that thing will actually happen. So it's almost like not even a waiting. It's a like wondering, like there's no guarantee you're going to get the job you want. There's no guarantee you'll get pregnant. There's no guarantee. And that's what I think makes it so hard, is the uncertainty that is coupled with the waiting. It's not like, it'd be one thing if God was like, hey, so in 2.5 years from now to the date, you will meet your person. Then you're like, okay, waiting becomes a million times easier, right? You can like be so much more intentional. You're like, I got to prepare for my marriage. So like, how can I make myself a better person? How can I grow? How can I lean into the Lord? All these things. But when you don't know if that's going to happen, but yet you're hoping it will, it can almost be easy to be a little bit aimless in life, right? And so we were talking about, what does it look like to prepare for the season or the thing that you're hoping and praying for, not knowing if it's actually going to happen, right? Like, it doesn't make sense if you're longing to be a parent and you're waiting and hoping and praying to get pregnant, have a child, etc. It doesn't really make sense to read parenting books, because there's no way to know if you're actually going to be a parent, and that could actually just add insult to injury, right? Or same with marriage or something else.
Right.
So how do you prepare if it doesn't make sense to prepare in that way? And so we were talking about it. It's like, I think the way you prepare is taking opportunities to allow God to take you deeper, to grow and to become a more interesting person, whether that's working on your mental health and going to therapy, working on and investing in your physical health. Maybe it's starting a business, or optimizing your business, or shifting career lanes, or going back to school, or getting involved in a Bible study, or exploring your faith in a deeper way, or traveling, or serving on a mission trip. Like, there's all these different ways that we can be investing and growing as a person and as a child of God, and helping make the world around us a better place, and fulfilling the calling on our life, which is love God, love people, make disciples, right? It's pretty simple. And that the ways in which we do that will vary by season. Prior to getting married, it's going to look one way. Prior to having kids, it's going to look another way. Once you have kids, it's kind of like raising them in some ways. So, that was really helpful for me. And looking at the season of whatever it is you're hoping for, right? The years, months, etc., when you're hoping to become a parent but struggling, or whatever it might be, kind of looking at that as like a preparation boot camp. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're in full blown, like, let me make a nursery and read parenting books and just like torture myself by doing that. But how can I become a better version of me? And how can I allow God to stretch me and grow me, so that if this does happen, and when it does happen, I have more to bring to the table. I have more rich experiences. I have learned, I've gained wisdom, and I can actually infuse that into my marriage, my job, my, parenting journey, etc. So that was really a challenge I had to take on myself. And I think that really did help me. Not only did the suffering and the waiting refine me in some ways, a lot of the things I chose to do in that time, like exploring how to live a little bit more of a healthy life. And now I've been able to implement that as I have a family, or checking some things off my bucket list and experiencing things in life that otherwise I probably would have waited until I, had kids or whatever. Doing things to optimize my business so that I have more time with my kids. But even if I didn't have the kids, there's nothing that's hurting me by doing that, right? So I think like, just my encouragement is, don't let the waiting season be a wasted season while you're just like aimlessly like waiting for whatever it is to happen. And like, it's okay to be frustrated when it's not, but if that's like kind of what's taking up the majority of your time, there's so much wasted opportunity there. Like, use this as an opportunity to grow. Use this as an opportunity to learn. Use this as an opportunity to prepare for whatever God has for you next. And we're going to hope it's the thing you're praying for, right? That's kind of the best encouragement and advice that I have, that I feel like if I could go back to myself at the beginning, I would have said that right when I first started trying for a family. And it took me a couple years to learn that. So
yeah, no, that's definitely helpful in a variety of seasons of waiting, because you can look back, and I think sometimes when we pursue whether it's motherhood, job, if you're pursuing the thing, you're not pursuing the process.
Yes.
And then you're pursuing the thing and it doesn't come. Like,
Yep.
it hurts all the more, so
Yep.
that's definitely helpful to keep our heart posture in check as we can still continue to grow in that season.
Yeah.
I have a couple of listener questions before we wrap up.
Yeah.
One of them being, what scripture did you cling to specifically in that season of waiting?
Yeah. I just pulled it up so I can say it correctly because I wanted to make sure I touch on this. So there was kind of a handful, and it kind of depended on where I was at, right? Like right during a pregnancy loss looked a little different than when I was just kind of like, am I
Yeah.
going to get pregnant again or whatever? But I think one that was consistent and that just kept coming back to my mind was Romans 5:3-5. It says, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, which is hard. And I remember thinking, not rejoicing, but okay, knowing this
Yeah.
is the part that I really clung to, that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us. And I had to realize, like, hope is not actually, I recorded a podcast episode with someone who said it perfectly. They said, hope is not a wish. Hope is not hoping in the thing you think you're going to get. It's actually hoping in the eternal work of God and not the circumstance or the gift or the thing that the creation you're praying for, whether it's the spouse or the job or the pregnancy or something else. And so I had to kind of reframe, what does hope look like? And every time things were really hard, I was angry for sure. But I also tried to remember, like, this is a workout. This is a boot camp. This is producing endurance in me that I think I'm going to need. I'm obviously going to need, or God wouldn't allow me to walk through it, right? Like there's going to be maybe some bigger challenges that I'm not even prepared for in my life or in the world around me that our generation's going to come up against. So those of us who've got some depth and who've got some battle scars and who've had to endure some things, like we're going to be the ones on the front lines and we are called to something bigger. And so I had to kind of lean into that and think bigger than just the zooming in and the microscopic experience I was having, and try to look at it through a more macro lens. And this scripture really helped me do that. It does make it easy, but that was something that really, really helped me, I think, through the trials and through the question marks and through the suffering, just remembering, like, your greatest disappointment, and I wrote this in my book, your greatest disappointment, which may be deep, deep grief, like, this isn't working out, I really want to become a parent, it's not happening. Or maybe just I didn't get the job I really thought I was going to get. Like, whether it's really deep or just really a bummer, your greatest disappointments in life can either be a dead end or a defining moment. And if you choose to allow them to be a defining moment, such as what's mentioned here in Romans 5, where suffering can produce endurance, which can produce hope and character, like that's where it is a defining moment in your life. It will prepare you for that next thing. But you could also say, forget it, I give up. And there might be days you feel like that, but like in the big picture, if you don't allow it to be a dead end, but you allow it to be a defining moment where God uses it to refine your character, to produce endurance in you, and to create this hope in something bigger than just the specific circumstance or thing that you're praying for, but in what He's really doing and the story and the plan He's working out, it allows you to see that your role is really critical, even if your role right now is really painful. So yeah, I think just remember, like, not just Romans 5, but the truth from that is your greatest pain, your greatest suffering, your greatest disappointment can be a dead end or a defining moment, and you get to decide.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one more listener question. I was talking to a friend actually this morning about just during a season of loss, and she said that in one of the instances, she didn't have like a full procedure, but the doctor so kindly tried to provide room for grief and was like, feel free to grieve this baby, blah, 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 like take your time, but it's just a clump of cells. Like at this point in the pregnancy, like it's just cells. And so that conversation kind of just led to this place of like the wrestle and, well, can I even grieve? Do I have the space to grieve? Because at that time she was walking alongside family friend that had just lost their baby at 40 weeks. So I think the heart of this question, which I think you touched on, part of it is like having community that sits with you in the valley, regardless of like what it looks like. But I think specifically, how do we not compare our hard as mothers or in the waiting, because this loss in our mind feels like not as hard or not big as a loss as this person, my friend, or what's going on in their life.
I think we do that all the time, right? Like we always want to, I don't know if gaslighting ourselves is the right way of saying it, maybe because other people make comments that make us feel gaslit in our grief, but like, oh, well, I shouldn't feel this way because it's not as bad. Here's the truth. There will always be someone who has something harder than you, and there will always be someone who has something easier than you. So this idea like that it's, some sort of like, well, mine is invalid because it's easier than so-and-so's. Well, someone might look at you and be like, well, like, for example, talking to your friend who lost her baby and it sounds like somewhat early along and the medical system tells her it's not a baby, what it is. So, okay, well, I guarantee you there's someone who is, having somewhat of a complicated pregnancy, but they don't feel like they can grieve because at least they didn't lose their baby, right? We immediately do this. Well, at least at least you.
Yep.
And the second you start inserting that, well, at least I didn't have to carry to 40 weeks and have this. At least it's like, okay, well, I bet your friend could say, well, at least this didn't happen when they were 4. Like, there's always going to be something that's more traumatic and tragic. So if that's what we're going to utilize to measure whether or not we should lament and grieve, then none of us are ever going to be honest with our feelings, right? So like, just know your grief isn't on a measuring stick. It's not a competition, and it's very valid and real. That doesn't mean you don't also grieve for your friend, and you can't also see the ways that that might be harder in some ways physically or whatever, but that doesn't make yours not hard, right? Like, I had to work through this even now in the early days of motherhood, because when I was walking through fertility challenges and loss after loss, I would get so annoyed when my mom friends would talk about how hard their baby not sleeping was, or how hard breastfeeding was, or something else that I'm like, hello, I would rather not sleep and have a live baby. Thank you very much, right? Like, taking into consideration the people in the context and the conversation is important when you're going to share your lament or your struggle. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say certain things in front of certain friends, but I remember thinking that and being so annoyed and thinking they're just so not grateful. Do they not realize what they have? Like, how much easier they have it or whatever. Now, having been on this side of it, I'm like, wow, I'm humbled, right? Like, and what I realized was there are just different kinds of hard. So the type of hard I was walking through was hard. It was a grief hard. It was a kind of a dark and a sad hard. Now, my mom friends who were struggling with not sleeping may not have had a grief hard, but it was a physically taxing hard. It was a marriage challenging type of hard, right? So they're just different types of hard. And I think what we do is we say harder, easier. Okay, how about just different types of hard? How about just different types of grief, different experiences with grief? Because even people who experience the exact same thing, someone who loses their baby at 8 weeks and someone who loses their baby at 8 weeks, they're going to process that totally differently. It's going to feel different. The circumstances surrounding that will feel different. Maybe somebody has a 2-year-old and this one doesn't. Maybe someone had a really traumatic loss and this one, this lady, hers wasn't that hard on her body, but it was harder on her emotionally for very. So this idea that like it's on some sort of like ladder really goes away really quickly when you consider that context. And so I think it's important to give yourself permission to grieve what you have to grieve and to struggle with what you need to struggle through, and find the people who can support you in that. It may not be your friend who's experiencing what you're experiencing on a magnitude 3 times the size in terms of a baby was bigger, or there's a postpartum experience they have, or something else that might make it hard for them to really hear what you're saying or be there for you. So find other people, but don't turn your grief off, because it's going to come back up down the road in a way that maybe you don't really expect or want if you don't allow yourself to work through it now because you're doing some comparison game.
Yeah, that was spot on. Wow. Thank you, Jordan. That was awesome.
Yeah. It's hard though. I've done it. I've been there. I've felt it. We all have,
Yeah, I just finished Abby's book, Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad, from the creator, M is for Mama. And that did a lot. It was really good just to reframe that. So I'll link that as well. And I'll link your book. So where can we connect with you, get plugged in, all those things before we close out?
Well, you can connect on Instagram, Jordan Lee Dooley. That's kind of the main area I hang out in terms of sharing every day or multiple times a week at least with kiddos. And then if you are walking through a season of unmet expectations or waiting or things not going how you hoped, my book Embrace Your Almost, the subtitle is Find Clarity and Contentment in the In-Betweens, Not Quites, and Unknowns, because adversity can really be the thing that gives us clarity on what God's calling us to in our life. And also it's a pursuit of contentment. I don't think you ever just arrive at this place of like everything's great when it's not how you hoped it would be. But what is the pursuit of contentment and the pursuit of not letting a waiting season be a wasted season look like? That's kind of what we dive into in the book. And I wrote it from the position of, I don't know if I'll ever get the thing I'm praying for. I hadn't become a mom yet. Adoption hadn't happened. I wasn't pregnant. I had just lost a baby. And I wrote it from this place of like, this isn't tied up in a pretty little bow, because I felt like most books on waiting and most books on unmet expectations were written from the perspective of 10 years ago, I walked through this and now I have XYZ and everything's okay. The book wouldn't be nearly as powerful if I wrote it from where I'm at today with 2 kids, because it would be this like, and now here's how it all happily ended. A lot of us are in that place of wondering, will I get the happy ending I'm praying for? Will it work out how I think? What if it doesn't? And that was the place I wrote the book from, of not knowing. And I think that's what really serves somebody in that place. So if that's something that you think might bless you or someone you love, it's called Embrace Your Almost. You can find it anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target. And I think it would be a really great resource for you in this season.
Absolutely. I crushed that book and then immediately sent it to a friend because it was just so
Yeah.
beautifully written, as you said,
Yeah, I think, yeah.
and meeting you where you're at
Uh-huh.
without all the Christian platitudes. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I have one more closing question for you, and I'm excited to see how you'll answer considering all the wisdom you've already shared. But if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for a community that is listening, what would you share?
That's a good question. I think if I had, I mean, there's so many different things I feel like I could touch on, but um, I think what I would say, whether you are in a hard season or you're in a mountaintop season and things are going how you want, I want to encourage you to try things. I talk about this in some of my books, and what I mean by try things is like I think sometimes we can get kind of comfortable in like where God has us. We get caught up in the day to day, and we aren't allowing ourselves to be stretched. And we definitely feel stretched in the hard seasons, but
Mm,
I feel like, allowing yourself to learn new things. Like if you're curious about something, start listening to podcasts on it, read a book on it, like listen to things or learn new things. I remember in my season of waiting, I felt like I focused on like, how do I garden? And let me learn, now in this
yeah.
season, I'm like, I want to learn how to make sourdough. It's just something I want to try. So allow yourself to
Mm-hmm.
always kind of be growing and trying, even if you feel like I have a lot of responsibilities on my plate. I don't have a ton of time. I think that's the lie we believe in. Then we just lose our ability to be creative and for God to grow us and to show us and to teach us new things about ourselves, our relationship with Him, His plan for our lives, and allowing ourselves to be creative and to try new things, not necessarily to like monetize or do anything formal with, but like
Right.
being an amateur and picking up hobbies or trying things that allow us to actually unplug and rest and be present and grow and acquire new skills. I think is something that we forget to do because we have so much access to information that, or to like, I've heard it called the digital pacifier. Like there's always something to be like consuming,
Mm-hmm.
that we are consuming so much and not creating a lot. Whether we're moms or we're waiting to become moms or somewhere in between or not interested in being a mom and hoping just to have a husband.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Utilize the season of life that you're in to be creative, to learn new things, to allow God to teach you, even if that's just through a simple herb box garden or learning how to bake bread or learning how to paint or writing your story. Just like find
Yep.
a way to try things and to roll up your sleeves and work with your hands. Because I think we get so caught up in our responsibilities that we miss out on the opportunities to do that. And I think those are the things that make even the hardest seasons a little bit more sweet.
Absolutely. I can totally empathize because I've been sharing my coffee chronicles. I just got a new espresso
Mm,
machine and have been happily failing
fun.
through it. So
Yep, I hear you. That's awesome.
that's been the process. But Jordan, this has been a beautiful conversation. I'm just so thankful for joining us today.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for having me. It was so nice to chat with you.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.